So here I am, back in the court cells again in Truro. Downstairs in the court cells, they have a big group cell that they kind of put you in before you're being seen, and then afterwards you go into little individual cells where you're kind of on your own, waiting to go back to prison. It's kind of, if you imagine it, like a bit like a drunk tank that you see on TV. I literally was in there. It was me and this other guy. He was a known drunk around sort of our area, and I still see him to this day. To be honest with you, we know each other to wave to, because we've seen each other in and out of prison a few times. But yeah, here I am looking at a good old Stretch again, and he's the only person I've got to speak to. He's looking at a couple of days, really. He's not going to be drunk and disorderly. He's going to be out in no time. I've just been and seen my solicitor, and he gives me the bad news that because this is my third violent offence, I'm looking at life in prison. I was completely shocked. As far as I'm concerned, this is not even the worst thing I've done this week. I've been in fights. I've done a lot worse to people. I've robbed people for far more money. I've had much more violent robberies before. And for my solicitor to sit me down and tell me that there's a good chance I'm looking at life in prison now, I was shocked. I was looking at 2 violent offence charges just on this offence alone. I was looking at aggravated burglary with intent of GBH, and I was looking at assault. They call it, assault of actual bodily harm, something like that. And the assault was the punch on the police officer, and the aggravated burglary was because I kicked my way into the property, and there were people in the house. So because I was in the property with no reason to be there, they call it burglary. So you don't have to walk out with a telly or anything like that. It's still burglary with you just being on the property with no reason to be there. And the aggravating feature was that there's people in the house, and obviously because I was carrying a hammer in there, and it was looking like I was going in there to fuck some people up, then it was aggravated burglary with the intent of GBH. This was a very serious charge. I've been charged with armed robbery in the past, which is a violent offence in its nature, and obviously with my past of fighting and things before, I was now looking at life in prison. I was fucked. I'm only 24, 25 at this point. It wasn't an actual life sentence. It was what they call an IPP, imprisonment for public protection. It was a new thing that the Labour government had brought out at that time, during the mid-2000s, to try and win votes and to get back public confidence in the legal system, so that violent offenders, people that continually commit crime, would be put away until they were deemed fit to get out. And I unwittingly walked into this category. I was suddenly one of the people that society was wanting to get off the streets. Obviously, the guy who was in for drunk and disorderly, he got out that day. So I was left in the drunk tank on my own, and he even came back to the door to kind of like knock on the window and sort of say, "See you later, pal. I'm off. Best of luck." I met up with him again a few months later. He got sentenced to for a different offence, and he bumped into me and he said, "You look like you've been hit by a bus that day. The news, you were white as a sheet." And I was gutted. I was absolutely gutted. Earlier on in that day, or earlier on in a couple of days, because I've been in the police station a couple of days, they were using all the time they had to investigate. There'd been a number of witnesses. People had seen me running through town. There'd been some builders in a van who'd spotted me running past. The reason they were able to identify me and the reason they came and got me was because I got picked up on CCTV. I was on one CCTV camera running through town, and even though it had been 2 or 3 years since I'd actually been arrested for anything, because I'd been in prison all that time, one of the police officers said, that's William, that's him. So that's why they came to investigate me and came to arrest me. There were some builders who'd seen me and said that they would definitely be able to pick me out again. There was another witness who I'd passed on the way running who said they'd probably be able to pick me again. Obviously the people in the house, gave evidence and said they'd be able to pick me out, and even the copper, because just as I'd opened the front door, I'd pulled my mask off, and not expecting the police to be on the other side, and just before I banged them, they said that they'd probably be able to see me again. So there was a good 8 or so witnesses that were all willing to pick me out. So the police were keen to do an identity parade. Now, it's not like you see on telly; they do them on video these days. So I stood in a room on my own and had some video taken of me standing there and turning around and things. I tried to put on a different expression, thinking that somehow. Oh no, what was I doing? I was trying to smile. I was trying to look happy, thinking that when I'd seen them, I'd obviously been looking angry. So I thought if I had a kind of happy expression on my face, then possibly they wouldn't pick me out. It was slim, but it was all I was working with at the time. So I kind of had a happy look in my eyes and put on a bit of a, you've got to be fairly expressionless, but I just kind of gave myself a happy glow. But what was on my mind at the time was, I was thinking that, again, I didn't want to go back to prison. I was thinking that at that point, when I was in this Newquay police station, that I was going to be there for maybe 6 or 7 years because of this. I didn't think it would be the life sentence that it was turning out to be. I wasn't in the usual custody area of the police station. I'd been put upstairs in a room that I hadn't been to. Normal. It's not the normal area that you'd normally go to. So me and my solicitor were in there while they were talking to us about the ID parade, and I kind of looked out the door. Now, outside of the door was just a corridor, and there was a window, because it was in the middle of the summer this now, and I remember, as I said in the last podcast, it was blue skies, it was a beautiful sunny day, it was we're going through a patch of sort of a heat wave, and I noticed that the window in the corridor was slightly open, and it was a chance, I thought, of escaping police custody and getting on my toes and buying myself a bit of freedom before I was going away for a long time. While the policeman and my solicitor were talking, possibly about different people in the lineup and things, I was just kept looking over my right hand shoulder and looking at the window in the corridor. Now, we were up on the first floor, so the way that it was set up, my hands were cuffed, so I wouldn't have been able to push the window. I would have just had to run at it, dive out with my head, and hope that there was something soft underneath. Now, I wasn't too keen on diving headfirst out of a window where I didn't know what was underneath. I didn't know if it would be, a pile of mattresses, or in my luck, it would probably be a skip of broken glass. But it was freedom nonetheless, and I would only be a short run from there into the middle of Newquay. Like I said, it's middle of summer, it would be crowded as fuck. I'd probably just disappear in a second, and then I had lots of connections in Newquay where I could just disappear for months at a time. So I don't think I would have been found, but I just had to be brave and make that initial decision to suddenly bolt, go for it 100% and dive out that window head first. Something in me said not to, though, so I didn't do it. I chickened out. I didn't dive out the window. I was more worried about fucking my neck up. I ended up being in a wheelchair and still going to prison. So I bottled out. I ended up in the police cells. They charged me with the aggravated burglary and with the ABH charge as well. And I made my way back to Exeter prison. I was obviously still there on my licence, because I've never actually even finished the sentence yet. It's still hanging around over my head. We are still obviously within the I think we passed the 4 years. No, I think I'd finished the original parole sentence now, so that 4 years wasn't hanging over my head anymore, but I was still on licence for the last time of coming out of prison, so I still had some time that they could possibly add on top of my sentence, whatever sentence I got for the GBH, to do as well. So I was looking at a substantial amount of time in prison. They weren't fucking up my court dates this time though, so they knew I was going to court. So yeah, I was back in Exeter, back on B wing. No, not B wing. Where would we go this time? I think I went straight onto C wing, and I was just on there now because I've been in and out of Exeter a few times now. I was starting to become a bit of a regular face. And what really annoyed me when I first went to prison is that all the regulars seemed to get all the good jobs, But luckily, this started to work in my favour, because as soon as I went in there, one of the members of staff had known me from previous times before and come and see me and said, "Look, we need a cleaner. Do you want to come? Do you want to be wing cleaner?" So I was the cleaner for my landing, which meant when everyone else went off to work, they'd leave my door open. I'd get to go around, just sweep and mop the landings. Generally clean the phones, and there was a little recess in the on the landing as well. So I've mentioned before, you've got a toilet in your cell where you you have to do everything. You have to smell your cellmate's shit when they go for a shit. It's not pleasant. But the only other option, if you didn't want to do that, would be the toilet on the landing, which again is shared by maybe 60, 70 other lads, possibly at any one time. And it's a bit of a fucking it's kind of Portaloo fresh, if you know what I mean. So what I did, because I hate taking a shit in front of people, I made sure that toilet was pristine, bleached, cleaned, because that's the one I occasionally used when I needed to. So I made sure that toilet was a throne, and because I took so much pride in cleaning the area and the landings, when a job came up for the gym, there was a gym orderly job came up, I was picked to be gym orderly because the landing staff recommended me, because I was always down the gym anyway. And then when the gym staff spoke to the landing staff, they were like, "Yeah, he's always working. He never stops." And because to be fair, I just wanted to get out of my cell. I just wanted to do something. Exeter is a boring prison, and I was quite happy just to, if it meant passing the time and meaning I had a nice clean toilet to shit in, I didn't mind doing it. Things were getting obviously a bit easier for me in prison. I knew plenty of faces on the wing. I had a good little cellmate. He was all right. He was the other wing cleaner, so we was in good stead. And one day, weirdly, this Scouser just came to the door, and he stuck his head in the door, and he kind of looked at me and was like, "Hey mate, hey, do you want to come in the cell with me?" And all sorts of things are going through my mind now, because generally I wasn't sure whether he wanted to rob me or fuck me. So I'm a little bit hesitant. I always used to have nice watches and things, and it wasn't massively expensive. It was only about 100 quid or so, but it was a nice watch, and it had a kind of a gold appearance about it. So the first thing I did was take my watch off and put it in my pocket, just in case he wanted me to go down to his cell and he was about to rob me for my watch. But it turned out that this Scouser was looking door to door, looking for a decent guy to be his cellmate, because the staff had told him that he was going to get some tramp in there going in with him. So he basically threatened them, told him that he'd go and pick his own cellmate, and for some reason he'd decided that he'd quite like me as a cellmate. So I went down, I looked at his cell. It was nice and clean, it was good. It was a better cell than I was in at that time, and I thought, fuck it, why not? And I think he made me some sort of offer. I can't remember what it was, but it was more appealing to be down with the Scouts than it was to be in the cell I was in. So I was like, fuck it, I'll go down there. Let's have a look. I got in with this little Scouts gang because he was a drugs runner, basically. He used to take drugs from Liverpool and take them down to Torquay. He'd have a rucksack full of drugs. Unluckily, he'd been followed, and when he got to the drop-off point, he basically dropped the bag in the middle of the room, and the police came in. So there was about 5 people in the house. They all got arrested, and yeah, they didn't know who the bag of drugs was, because none of them were actually holding the drugs, but they nicked all 5 of them, and one of them, I'll call him Paul, was my new cellmate. It was good times. He had some friends who were also from Liverpool, who he introduced me to, who were bank robbers. And not only did they rob banks, but they robbed security call boxes and those vans, the security vans as well, that go around dropping off or picking up money from the banks. Now, I could never do that crime because I'm never 100% sure whether they're dropping money off or picking money up. And again, with my luck, I would end up robbing the empty van before they either picked up or dropped off the cash. But also they were getting a bit of weed in at the time, and I quite enjoyed smoking weed at that point. So things were going quite well. We were getting stoned, and I was listening to all these great stories that they had to tell. They had an irregular way of getting drugs in. Now, this is, I know I'm out of, because I'm Cornish, but Exeter's in Devon. I still had a lot of connections that could get stuff over the wall, and the Scousers had plenty of drugs that they wanted to get in. So we ended up teaming up. His people, the Scousers would end up sending drugs down to, or meeting up with my people, and my guys would get the drugs into the prison, either over the wall or through visits and things, and we shared in the fortune. So once again, I'm starting to make money in prison with drugs, and this time I don't really give a fuck, because I'm kind of, I've got free reign now, because I'm either going to spend the rest of my life in prison or I'm going to get out with a trial. So whenever I got caught before, it was always pretty clean cut. I'd always been pretty much, oh fuck, I've got to plead guilty to this, I'm done, I'm fed up. This time was the only time where I was ever going to go to trial, and I was actually going to look like it was a 50-50 chance. So yeah, I had pretty much free reign in jail. I didn't really care anymore. I didn't really listen to their rules. I was fighting, and I was selling drugs, and getting drugs sent over the wall, really. It was great times. The Scousers that I was banged up with, I remember reading the paper, because what they'd been done for. Now, they used to rob Barclays banks all over the country. Barclays had quite a set routine. Any branch in the country, what they did was, whenever they shut the door at 5 o'clock, they'd also shut all the blinds in the bank. And he said just to give it about 15-20 minutes, and you can pretty much guarantee their next job, once they'd locked up, would be to take the cassettes of cash from the back and refill the cash machine in the window. All right. So what he always used to do was wait 10-15 minutes after they'd locked up, and he'd just go and get a stolen van, and he'd smash it through the front window, and he'd rob the bank. Him and a couple of others, robbing the bank, as in picking up the cassettes when they were putting them in the back of the cash machine. He did this all over the country. He ended up getting followed by the police, and they followed him from the bank straight to the strip club. And they described him as being running a job centre for out of work criminals. They were a great bunch to hang around with, and I had the best time hanging around with the Scouse gang. And once they either got sentenced or got out, because the rucksack guy, the one I was in the cell with before, the guy called Paul, he ended up admitting that the bag was his, and there was no DNA on it or anything. So everyone else walked out of it, and he ended up getting about 6 years for a bag full of drugs. But he would have got away with that as well, because in the end, even if they've got a bag of drugs in between everyone, if they can't prove whose bag of drugs that is, everybody gets away. They can't sentence everybody. They have to pin it on someone, and unless they'd found some DNA, they may have done at some point. But at that, when they were going through people's trying to pin it on someone, there was no DNA on that bag. So yeah, he kind of put his hands up too early there. So yeah, everyone was getting out or getting sentenced. The bank robbers and that got moved on to another prison. So I ended up moving into a cell with someone who was an enforcer for one of the drug dealers I used to work for. It was a chap from London that I used to get my drugs from, my cocaine and things. And he had taken on an enforcer from Manchester. And this enforcer, we'll call him Smithy, ended up in Exeter prison on a gun charge. They'd found a gun hidden away in a property that he'd rented previously, and the landlord had phoned the police, obviously, and it ended up with Smithy going to prison. They believe there was a fingerprint on it. So he was looking at quite a while in prison. They were looking at a robbery charge for him as well, where he'd tried to extort someone, and it wasn't looking great. Now, obviously, we gravitated together because we worked for the same drug dealer from London, and we ended up sharing a cell for quite some time. It was at this point we planned to escape from Exeter prison. It was a bit of a sketchy plan. I'm not 100% sure if it had worked or not, but at that point, I was starting to, come to terms with the fact that there was a good possibility that I could be in prison for a good 10 years or so plus. So what my plan was, it was a crazy kind of plan where we were going to try and get hacksaw blades posted in. So if you imagine an A4 envelope, and I don't know if this would have worked. I don't know if they X-ray all the post that comes in. That was something we were going to have to test. But we were going to get hacksaw blades sent in A4 envelopes. So if you imagine the flap, there's a flap top and bottom of the envelope to obviously stick it down. We were going to get an envelope that would get the bottom of the envelope and unstick the bottom bit, put a hacksaw blade in that sticky flap, and then glue it back shut again. Because when the prison staff open letters, they do so with a letter opening knife, so they don't pick the flap off. They just slice the top of the envelope and open it that way. So even when the letter was open, the hacksaw blade would hopefully still be stuck inside the envelope. I would have tested this by sending the hacksaw blade to a random prisoner in the prison and seeing if they got caught for it. But yeah. So once we got the hacksaw blades to obviously cut our way out the bars, I was then going to pay someone 20,000 to come and climb onto a nearby roof that was just the other side of the wall from the prison, on the D wing side, because it gets quite close to the outside there. We were going to fire a line over to them using sort of a slingshot technique. They would then tie that line to a rope, a rock climbing rope. We would anchor it inside the prison and use that rope to get off over the wall. I don't know if it all worked. It was the best plan I had at the time. We had someone, because funnily enough, my friend owed me a favour, so I was going to pay him 20 grand to come and do it. He's just crazy enough to do it as well, and me and my friend from Manchester were going to get off on our toes. Through the drug dealer that we both used to work for, we could have quickly been squirreled off to Spain and gone and lived our lives out there for a while on the run. But the more I thought about it, the more I didn't want to hide in Spain. It seemed like quite an obvious thing for me, and to be honest, I wanted to get as far away as I could from this guy from Manchester, because two of us on the run is one thing, but I would have thought I had much more success hiding in Cornwall than I would have done in south of Spain with all the other criminals. Sounding like you're going to escape is a bit of a, talking about escape and planning to escape it seems like a bit of a fantasy. But when I was in Portland, two people had done just that. On Christmas Eve, they'd hacksawed their way through the bars. They took the hacksaws from the prison workshop. You would have thought that they'd been noticed, but yeah, they took the two hacksaw blades from the prison workshop. They cut through the bars on Christmas Eve, and they dropped down using sheets. It wasn't a short drop as well. They were quite high up. They must have dropped maybe, tied sheets together and climbed down maybe sort of 60, 70 feet. But then they didn't have any plan to get out of the prison. I don't know how they would have thought they were going to get over the wall. Apparently, early in the morning on Christmas Eve, they handed themselves into the block. They just knocked on the door and handed themselves into the block. It seemed ridiculous to me. If they did have a plan at getting over the wall, it didn't execute, or whoever was supposed to be helping them get over the wall, it didn't execute, because yeah, they got caught. Well, they didn't even get caught. They just handed themselves in. So it may have worked, it may have not. I mean, looking back at it now, I doubt I would have been successful in my plan. But at the time, it was definitely a plan B if I was getting sentenced to life. We sat for hours, sitting up all night, watching the staff movements. We needed to make sure that we weren't just going to be, when my pal was throwing ropes over the wall, and we were going to be planning on, being outside of the cell and running around in the prison grounds, and we didn't want to just bump into a random patrol. So we sat for days and weeks watching when these staff patrols would go around in the middle of the night, and we kind of clocked when they were, and there was a bit of a regular pattern to it. There were a couple of hours at a time where we thought we could have not been found and things, and genuinely we did make a plan to escape and get away. We even spoke to my pals and things outside on mobile phones that we had in prison, and I organised it in great detail. It was getting closer to the time of the trial, so I was more, half focused on my trial and half focused on this escape plan. But it was all, it was one way or the other for me. My cellmate at the time, that Smithy, was convinced I was being misled by my lawyer. He was sure that my defence wasn't strong enough, and that he wanted me to go and see his lawyer, and he thought that I would have a much better chance with him. But I still had confidence in my own story. My solicitor was telling me that it was very difficult to prove the intent, because I hadn't actually swung at anybody. I hadn't tried to hit anybody with the hammer. It was very difficult that I'd gone there with the intent to cause GBH. So, in the end, after the police line-up, the ID parade in Newquay, none of the witnesses picked me out. None of the witnesses picked me out. So the builders, even the people in the house, had picked the wrong person. The only person that picked me out of the lineup was the policeman that I punched on the doorstep. My lawyer was saying that we could walk through this. This was that was all way too convenient. That out of all of those witnesses that said that they would definitely pick me out again, the only one that did actually pick me out of the lineup was the policeman. So in a police lineup, the only one who picked me out was the policeman. So I was hoping that wouldn't really stand up in the trial. I basically was only saying that I was there to scare them. I was saying that I was the friend of a relative who was going there to split up this couple. I didn't hit anyone with the hammer. I didn't even swing it. I didn't think they could prove the intent of GBH as far as I was concerned. I'd given the police a statement and said nothing else. That is the best way to deal with the police in any kind of police interview. It's their job to kind of twist you up. They sit there and they literally, there's that whole saying, good cop, bad cop. One of them will talk to you and give them a load of information and facts and say, I think this was you, wasn't it? This was you. This was definitely you. While the other one's sitting there listening, looking at your mannerisms, watching you, doing all the body language, and then they'll start coming in. And anything that they've see that the other policeman's hit or missed, or any nerves that were touched, they'll start picking away at you, and you've got to make sure you're saying the right thing every time, because they're tag teaming, they're taking notes, they've got all the time in the world. They're literally recording what you're saying, and then they're going to try and pick it apart. All right, so the best thing you can do is sit there with your solicitor. Your solicitor will tell you all the information that the police have got, if they can. If they haven't given the solicitor any information, then you can just sit there and say nothing. But my best advice is to always just give a prepared statement that says what you want to say to get it off your chest. And the best thing you can do is just explain the situation, but make it look like you haven't committed a crime. Just give a prepared statement and then never say anything else. It's the best advice you can get, because the jury can always they call it an inference. They can take an inference to basically say that you didn't say anything because you were guilty. So if you give your side of the story and then don't say anything else, that's perfectly within your rights to do so. And that's all you have to do. My trial date finally came about. In this time, I'd seen and heard very little from my girlfriend. We'd broken up again, obviously, when I went back to jail. Even though we'd broken up, I still called her on her birthday. Her birthday was in September. We'd broken up in the summer, and I phoned her, and it was early, I think, on a Saturday morning. It was about 10 o'clock-ish, something like that. And I phoned her, and she was kind of a bit awkward on the phone. And then suddenly, in the background, I heard a man's voice. And it was just instant, gut-wrenching, the man in the background kind of phone call. Obviously, he's not just there bringing her breakfast. My heart sank. I saw red. I remember just smashing the handset against the phone. I went completely mad. This was, the love of my life with somebody else. She'd obviously been, she had the baby, and she lost the baby to someone else before. But, I hadn't had to hear his voice. I went back to my cell and I was raging. My cellmate and me, we talked about it. I planned to have someone go around there and smash his legs. Smithy convinced me not to have it done. It wasn't his fault that she was a bitch. But yeah, I was fuming. Me and my sisters talked. It was fairly fairly standard, really. The jury would come in. There'd be more of them than we needed. I think they have 11 jury members, something like that, and they'd bring in something like 15 or 16 of them. These are all people picked at random from the community to come and judge me. They always pick out more than they need, just so that the defence and the prosecution can pick out the ones that they want. I only really remember 2 out of the 15 or so. One of them was a young lad, sort of early 20s, and he was kind of scruffy looking. He looked a bit of a scally. He came to court in a tracksuit to be in the jury that day. Unfortunately, he didn't make the final cut. I thought he might have been on my side. The other one was a girl in her late 20s, and she took it very seriously. When she stood up to do her little being sworn in bit, she really put emphasis in the words. I mean, they say something like, "I will do my best to judge this fairly, and I will do my best to look at the evidence honestly," and things like this. And everyone else kind of just read it from the sheet, but she kind of put gusto behind the words, and really, I really kind of worried about her because she looked a bit like a justice warrior. I really felt like she would be possibly one I needed to convince, as she would be. She would be a key player in the decision making of my fate afterwards. The drug dealer and his missus, who jumped on my back, was sat just to my left in the public area. My ex and her dad were kind of sat a bit further along from them on the same benches. It was only going to be 1 day trial. It wasn't very complicated. I wasn't denying being there. I was only denying being there for GBH. It was a very risky move. Normally, people would say, just deny it is you, deny being there, deny having anything to do with it. They didn't have they didn't have a thumbprint. They didn't have any fingerprints on the hammer. There was no DNA. The people in the building hadn't picked me out. Nobody had picked me out other than the copper and the initial policeman who said that was me on the CCTV. So I could have quite easily just done a shaggy and said it wasn't me. But I decided to play a much riskier game of accepting everything they'd said, but I just denied that I was there to cause GBH. The prosecution went first. They painted a picture of a couple, having their day ruined by an aggressive robber. It was very factual and didn't differ too far from what happened. It was just the girl who stood up and gave her side of the story in the dock. The fella had a statement read out. Then they brought me to the stand so I could say my piece. When you're standing in the courts, you stand there facing the jury. I was looking at all of them there. The judge was to my left, slightly higher, and looking down towards me. I always remember from reading Dave Courtney's books, Dave Courtney being a London gangster. He used to run a lot of the doors in clubs in London and surrounding areas. He was in control of hundreds, if not, a couple of hundreds of doormen at a time, and he would have mass brawls. And I've read his books in prison; they're hugely entertaining. But he had gone through several trials and got through them favourably, and explained in detail, sometimes even after he'd done the crime, how he would get away with it by just playing the court system and playing this whole theatre that is a trial, basically. I read how he put his cases across in court, and you basically go along with some of the facts and then you spin your own story for the rest. The police have to prove their case, and they also have to prove that what you're saying isn't true. You only have to give them a story which isn't provable one way or the other, and then run with it. I said... I made up a story about how I was just going there to kind of split up this drug dealer and a girl that he was seeing. I said that I had been approached by someone that I owed money back from when I used to be a crackhead, which I'd already told the police I was years ago, which isn't. None of this is true. I told them a story about how I'd been approached by an old drug dealer who I owed money. I said I owed about £1,500 to this guy, and he said that if I didn't do what he said, then he was going to attack my girlfriend. And he said that the debt would be squashed if I scared this rat who was dating his niece, not the girl in the house, but I made up this idea that he was dating somebody else, had another girl sniffing around. So I was hoping that, you know, this would ruin his little happy life as well, and throw the spanner in that, because suddenly she would think that he was cheating. I even ad-libbed a new bit in there where I said, when I was standing up, I said that I'd been ordered not to hit him, as that would only make things worse. My barrister loved that, and when he was giving his little summing up speech at the end, he even added it into his closing statement, saying that, why, it doesn't even make sense that, you know, while William was there, he was told not to hit the man. You know, because it would only make things worse, the situation worse. And, you know, I think that helped me, really. I felt really confident. The prosecution barrister wasn't even that good. He didn't really pull me apart. He didn't try and trip me up. And even my ex had said afterwards that, you know, she'd grilled me harder about, you know, where I'd been after a long weekend out than the way he grilled me in court that day. He may have been new. The prosecution may have thought it was such an open and shut case that they didn't have to pull out their top barrister, and maybe this guy was on one of his first few cases. Who knows? But for whatever reason, he wasn't the A game that day, and I felt very confident in my story and my ability afterwards. The judge summed up at the end and said to the jury, "If you think William went there to cause GBH, you must find him guilty. If you think that he was there for any other reason, then you must find him not guilty." And that was it. The trial was over. I got led back downstairs and awaited my fate. It was only 1 p.m. It had been quite quick. Like I say, there wasn't too much complication in the case. We weren't denying that we were there. We were just denying that we was there for GBH. It could be days before they made a decision. I took my shirt off. I don't think I even owned a suit at that point still. I think this was still my, my job interview shirt, making an appearance again. I was pacing up and down. I was laying down. I was trying just to kind of put my mind at rest. It could be ages before they made a decision. It could be the rest of the afternoon. It could be a couple of days before they came to a decision that they were all happy with. But before I knew it, the door was being unlocked again and the court staff opened the door. It was 3 p.m. and they'd made the decision. They'd had 1 hour for lunch and they'd had 1 hour making their decision. And now they were ready. Was this enough? Had they properly thought this through? I was starting to think like, fuck, they'd just taken an hour. They'd taken an hour to decide my fate. 1 hour plus lunch. I've spent longer than an hour before deciding what to have for lunch, and I've still made wrong choices. And they'd made a decision that was going to affect me for the rest of my life. The court cells put the cuffs back on me and led me back to the door that takes you to the stairs, which takes you back up to the courtroom. Everyone was back in the room. There was the hustle and bustle. The judge came in. Everybody stood up. I looked over at my ex and she was nervously looking back at me. The judge settled down the room and the little justice warrior in the jury stood up. He asked her if they'd made a decision that they were all in agreement with. She nodded her head and said that they had. I stood there waiting. The judge looked over at the justice warrior. And he says, how do you find the defendant? As she said the next few words, I was hit by a physical wave of emotion. I actually felt the room hit me. It was like a rushing sound, like a wave blasting past me. My head fell back as I was looking at the ceiling of the court. Fuck.